Hello and welcome. We are back with another episode of the Black Response. This is the place where Color of Change is working to engage everyday people to help build more equity and power around how we respond to this moment and the work to come as we are all facing down the impacts of COVID-19 on our communities and on the country. TheBlackResponse.org is the platform where we are asking everyday people to take action with us. And we are so excited today to welcome Congresswoman Jayapal from the state of Washington. She is a Congresswoman representing the 7th Congressional District, which for folks that don't know, that's kind of Seattle and some places around there. She is the first Indian American woman in the House of Representatives. She's also the leader of something called the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And for folks that may not know what that means, is that inside of Congress, members of Congress of like minds, from like communities gather together to build more power, to share energy, to work together to move legislation. And there's, you've heard from members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who are also, some of whom are the members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. But the Congressional Progressive Caucus is an organization inside of Congress of members of Congress that work to champion causes that we oftentimes work on at Color of Change. And so welcome, Congresswoman, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rashad. It's wonderful to be with you. And I just love that you're continuing to draw attention to these really critical issues that don't, frankly, get enough attention in the discussion.
Thank you. And I know, and so for folks who are at home, folks who are watching this on their phone, people who are engaged, are wondering sort of what are the things that they can do to take action. And what we know is that there was sort of a CARES 2 Act, and then there was the what folks are calling the sort of middle ground act between this next act. There was a 3, and then people calling 3.5. And now we are heading towards a 4th sort of package of legislation that is meant to champion sort of causes that people are going to need. I guess the first question is, why do we need so many pieces of legislation, and what are we hoping to accomplish in this piece of legislation that maybe wasn't accomplished in the previous ones?
Yeah, well, I think that there's 2 things, and you mentioned the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I should just point out we represent about 40% of all of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, so it's a big caucus. It's very diverse. We have representation from all the ethnic caucuses, so the Black Caucus, the Latino Caucus, and the Asian Caucus. And our members are often at the forefront of pushing particularly disparities, whether it's wealth disparities, racial disparities. That is, I think, something that the Progressive Caucus has been invested in and lifting those up. And that is what you have seen with these relief packages. Now, there are 2 reasons for why do we still need to do, actually maybe 3 reasons for why we still need to do more. First of all, Rashad, the scale of the crisis is enormous. I mean, we have not had a time where every single one of our 50 states in the union has declared an emergency declaration. And today, we are at 30 million filed unemployment claims. That does not include a potentially lot more of people that could not get into the system to file their claims. Otherwise, I think we would be even higher. And let's not forget that even with unemployment, there are so many people that are excluded from the unemployment system for all kinds of reasons. So the scale of a crisis where on the economic side, we're seeing devastation. And then, of course, first and foremost, from the public health side, we passed 2 days ago the mark of more American lives lost during the COVID-19 crisis than American lives lost during the Vietnam War. And the body bags are piling up, and they're piling up particularly in communities like in the Bronx and Queens and New York, but everywhere across the country where Black and brown folks are. The disparity of how COVID-19 is hitting Black communities is stunning. Black folks are twice as likely to get the virus, and that's just from reported data. A lot of data is not even tracking by race or ethnicity. And that's true for Black and brown folks both, but the disparities we are seeing, particularly for Black folks, Milwaukee County, 71% of deaths are African American. In Chicago, 81% of deaths are African American, when the percentages of the African American population, the Black population, is so much smaller than those numbers. So the things that we have done so far, and it's kind of stunning to think about Congress passing bills that total about $3 trillion in 3 weeks, right? That from the time that we passed our first bill to the time that we passed this third bill, this interim package that we just passed, that's about $3 trillion, and it all was done in a period of 3 weeks. With bipartisan support, because the way that we're operating remotely doesn't allow for anything, hasn't so far allowed for anything other than essentially unanimous consent. This last bill did have a vote, a recorded vote, but for the most part, that's how it's been working. So when you say, why are we, what is it that we're doing that we haven't done? We just have not responded with the scale of the crisis, and we haven't addressed the inequity of our institutionalized systems that naturally deprioritize Black and brown folks. So you had the health crisis before, where already we knew that folks of color were disproportionately burdened. They didn't have health insurance. I mean, there's a new Gallup poll out that says that an unbelievable 1 in 7 Americans, and the vast majority low income and people of color, would not seek health care, even if they knew they had the coronavirus symptoms, because they're afraid of costs. Wow. So a for-profit system that doesn't allow people to seek healthcare, but also that has put people in the conditions that, by delaying treatment, delaying healthcare, given them the very conditions that make them susceptible. So if you are living with asthma, as so many Black and brown folks do, by a highway, if you're living in a community that has had toxic dumps put into those communities, you will suffer respiratory illnesses. If you have diabetes or other health issues that have not been treated because you have not been able to get health care, you are more susceptible to getting this virus and to dying from it. So everything that we do should be thinking not only about how we make sure we don't exclude anyone from relief packages, which has not happened, and we've tried very hard, but that has not happened, but also has to make sure that we're addressing the pre-existing racial inequity and economic inequity that was there. So that is why CARES 2, or COVID 4, however you want to think about this thing, this next bill has to rise to the scale of the crisis. And we have to stop excluding people, but we have to put intentional focus on how we get relief to Black small businesses, Black and Latinx communities, immigrants, regardless of citizenship, because this virus does not discriminate by citizenship. And so those are the things that we are really trying to push for: a people's bailout, a people's recovery, healthcare for everybody, protections for essential workers, largely folks of color and low-income workers who are out there doing the work that they need to do, and of course, making sure that we can continue the other systems that we are fighting for, like vote by mail and the postal service system, et cetera. So that's what we're fighting for now.
And so I really appreciate you talking about sort of all of the inequities that preceded this, right? Because sometimes there's a lot of conversations of cutting programs or targeting communities. And then what ends up happening is that then you blame those communities when situations hit, and then they're not able to respond. And this has been the history for Black people, of being blamed for every sort of crisis. You know, we get denied education, then get blamed for not being educated, been denied access to healthcare, then get denied from being healthy. And a lot of members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and members of the Congressional Black Caucus and others have been pushing for are pieces of legislation that deal with some of those inequities. And one of those pieces of legislation which you've introduced and are championing is the Paycheck Guarantee Act, which at Color of Change we are proud to endorse and support. And I'd love it if you can talk a little bit about what this effort is trying to address, and sort of the roots of these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Paycheck Guarantee Act goal is to stop mass unemployment. And you might think in listening to that, well, that's just about everybody. It's not really about Black folks and brown folks or people of color. But actually, you won't be surprised, but maybe some of your listeners who are thinking about this haven't thought about it in quite this way. Who is it that is on the front lines right now? Who is it that is being sent back to work that can't shelter in, that's being sent back to work to do the essential work? And then who is it that's unemployed? The people that are unemployed are largely people who can't do work sheltering in place. Those folks are largely the people that work in service sector jobs, manufacturing jobs, are not highly paid, are probably on the lowest quartiles of income, and are largely folks of color and other low-income workers. And so when you think about mass unemployment and who is it hurting, it is hurting the lowest income workers. And we know from everything that we've done before that those are largely people of color. So stopping mass unemployment is what John Powell and others would call targeted universalism, right? It is a universal program, but it targets the people that need it the most. And this is what other countries have done to protect folks from being pushed into the unemployment system, because it is better for us, particularly as folks of color, but for everyone, to be able to keep our job. Why is it better for us? Because once we go into the unemployment system, we then are also pushed off of healthcare if you had it. I mean, 35 million people are going to lose their healthcare because they lose their jobs. You and I know that a Medicare for all system would not allow that to happen. But we don't have a system that is not a for-profit healthcare system that guarantees healthcare for everyone. So you lose your job, you lose your healthcare, you have to get pushed to other safety net programs, and it becomes extremely difficult for you to get all the support that you need. On top of that, what do we know about the unemployment system? When people are trying to come back into work, guess who has the hardest time getting a job again in the marketplace? It's Black and brown folks. So if we can prevent people from going into the unemployment system, we need it. It's really good, and it's important that we expanded it. And there are some people that will continue to need it, and it should stay there. So these are complementary things. But if we can keep people in the jobs that they have, but provide them a paycheck so that they can pay their rent and their mortgage and get food on the table and all the other bills that they have, that is really the best way to go about it. And it takes away the anxiety of what happens. How do I get a job after this? I don't want to be on unemployment forever. I want to be able to get a job. This says you don't have to go on unemployment. You stay in your paycheck. Now, we know that the Paycheck Protection Program, what was called the PPP that we passed in CARES 1, had some of the similar ideas. It wasn't designed to stop mass unemployment. It would never be able to do that because it was designed for a pretty small group of people, businesses under 500. But it went through banks. And when you go through banks have never been good to folks of color. I mean, they anything that makes us think that going through banks is going to get money to small minority businesses or the unbanked is just crazy thinking. Yeah. So what we do in the Paycheck Guarantee is we say we guarantee benefits and payroll and benefits, and we give a 25% maintenance cost to the company or the nonprofit or the government. This applies to government as well. If you're facing layoffs due to revenue loss. Mm-hmm. But we do it straight from Treasury and the IRS. So we don't use the banking system. We go straight out to people, and that stops the competition where I just read today that over $1 billion of the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program that we passed, went to huge companies, many of whom were over 500 employees. So you don't have a competition. Everyone is eligible for this, but you got to keep workers on payroll. And frankly, if you're a Black worker working for a company that has 800 employees, why shouldn't your paycheck be as important as a Black worker working for a small business? It should be, because the ultimate goal is to protect the worker and to stop mass unemployment. And we would make this retroactive, Rashad, so that people who had already been laid off or furloughed could also get pulled back onto the payroll. So we're super excited about it because we think it addresses racial disparities. We think it keeps money coming in the door. And then you can target some other stimulus checks to the lowest wage workers who also still need a hand up, even if they continue to get their paychecks. But it takes away some of the need for rent moratoriums and other things that we've been calling for, because you would actually have your paycheck and you would be able to continue. And businesses would be able to know that they've got some certainty of a grant, not a loan that may or may not be forgiven by a bank that may or may not have a relationship with you, may or may not care about you, but direct from the IRS to the entity.
Yeah. Me and my team continue to hear sort of the Hunger Games from our members, many of whom are small business owners, or are members of churches who try to access,
Right.
that first, set of money, and the sort of hoops that people have to jump through to get to those resources. And so, in terms of the sort of effort to get behind something like this, which would shift the energy from big banks who, anybody who kind of has followed the history of redlining in this country, the history of discrimination from loans, right? It's not that Black people are less likely to get loans from banks. It's that banks are less likely to give loans to Black people.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it is an active thing that banks have done. This is not about Black people. This is about the banks. And the banks continue to put themselves in the middle of these situations, and proved once again that they cannot be vehicles that help us get to anything that's going to be equitable. And so, in terms of sort of for people who are saying, this sounds great, and people who may have some time and energy on their hands, at the blackresponse.org, we have a petition on our platform to support this. So we hope people will go there and sign it. But what other things do we need to do to sort of raise attention around this so that it can get the momentum and power it needs?
A couple of things. So, and thank you for making the clarification about it's not Black people who are less likely, it's the banks that are less likely. That's the same with employment. When I said Black people have a harder time, Black and brown folks have a harder time getting jobs, it's because the person who's looking at that resume tends to be a white person. And when they look at a resume and you have the exact same resume, but one name, and I don't even know what this means, but sounds like it's a person of color, then that person won't get the job. Whereas the white
it's
person,
Rashad or Pramila, right? That's
exactly.
That's probably
we know exactly what those names are. And then they look at our activities and they see NAACP or immigrant rights, and it's another signal right there. But thank you for making that distinction. Very, very important. So what can people do? They can sign your petition. Please sign that petition. They can call their member of Congress, because one of the things we have to do is, we're working very quickly. And so this idea has picked up tremendous steam, and thank you, Color of Change, for really lifting this up. But we need more. We need to show that this is something that everybody understands would really help Black small businesses, folks of color, and our economy, right? I mean, it's good for the economy, but it is targeted universalism to the people that need it the most. So contact your member of Congress and ask them to support the Paycheck Guarantee Act. And then talk about it in your church. Talk about it in your community group. Do whatever forums you can do to get more people engaged, because write an op-ed to your local paper and say, this is what we need. The PPP is going to run out of money again. But let me tell you, putting more money into a program that is showing us the structural flaws. And I know we did good work to get, $60 billion that is set aside specifically for minority MDIs, minority depository institutions, and CDFIs, community development finance institutions, that are more likely to work with folks of color. And
those are like banks and financial institutions and communities that are actually focused on ensuring that their focus is not just on some big sort of shareholders and profit, but on ensuring that communities can get access to funds.
That's right. And those institutions are important, and we got some money for them, but that's not going to meet the scale of the crisis. So again, if you can write an op-ed, if you can call your member of Congress, make sure they are sponsoring the Paycheck Guarantee Act, talk about it in your community, and then of course sign your petition. This is going to require quick and a lot of work to lift it up, because we have very short period of time. We may be introducing a new CARES package in the next week. And I am trying to do everything I can to get this into that package. Tell people to be bold. Just because we threw some spaghetti at the wall and there's a bunch of stuff that's not sticking, let's not put money into things that aren't working. Yeah. Let's actually rise to the scale of the crisis. 30 million people have filed unemployment claims. We are set for the first time since the Depression to potentially reach 25% unemployment. That means 1 in 4 Americans will be unemployed. And those that are unemployed are going to be folks of color, largely disproportionately so.
And right, and for folks who are listening to this, right, it will mean, right, a real change to our communities, right? The same banks that created this sort of Hunger Games around the resources will then have access to our churches, have access to our homes, have access to our buildings, because people will end up foreclosing, and our communities will end up looking very different. And so what we are talking about right now is not just putting money, right, into more money into a flawed program, but how do we imagine a program that actually deals with equity, that actually has corporate accountability sort of in the framework? And that's what we're asking people to engage in. One of the other things that I think is important is, right, there was a one-time payment to folks, right? But this is not a one-time issue. Like, today is May 1st.
That's right.
Rent is due for a lot of folks, and a lot of other bills are due for folks. And so what in terms of the sort of legislation that's moving right now can people look to in terms of additional payments that can help support people and their families?
Right. Well, on the Paycheck Guarantee, by the way, we continue it. So it's not a one-time thing. It continues. It's 3 months up front, but then it continues on a monthly basis until the economy meets certain economic indicators around unemployment levels and other consumer demand. So that means that you can guarantee it's going to continue, which is really, really important. Now, we are also pushing for stimulus checks, more stimulus checks targeted to those who need it the most. If you got a Paycheck Guarantee, you would need less of those stimulus checks, and you could target them to the people that need it the most at the very bottom. In addition to that, we are trying to do more around rent and mortgage, halting rent and mortgage payments, because we did it for federally funded properties, but that's not everyone. Same thing with college tuition. I personally believe we should have canceled all college debt, because it would be a huge economic boost to the economy, but it's also ridiculous that we have 1.5 trillion. But even if we, canceled the payments for this time of the crisis, because we don't want to just delay payments. If you delay payments, it just means everything gets added up. And the minute the crisis is over, you suddenly owe all these bills. So that's not good either. Also, an essential workers package. This is really, really important. And I want to go back to the Paycheck Guarantee at the end of this list, just to highlight one other point. But we have all these folks who are out there working right now. They should be getting significant hazard pay. They should be getting PPE and testing. They should have serious OSHA standards so that they don't have to go to work, and they have paid leave to be able to stay home if they are sick. I mean, we have to, if we're going to call people essential, then we have to actually treat them as essential. And undocumented folks who are out there in the meat packing plants and in the fields picking the food that's going into our food banks and on our food table, they should be allowed to stay here with legal status, because it is ridiculous to say we want you to go to work and not even be able to stay home, and we're going to put ICE on you to try to deport you. So,
and it's more direct than that too, right? Because people are in a catch-22, right? You have to choose between your health and your safety or your job.
Exactly.
And you're blamed if you go to work sick, but you're not giving time to take off, and all of this.
And you don't qualify for unemployment. Yes. If you decide to stay home, according to what Donald Trump is trying to sign with the meatpacking plants. And that's what I wanted to go back to with Paycheck Guarantee. It is an economic relief package, but it is also a public health package. And I want people to think of those two things as one and the same. Because if we want our economy to recover, job number one is to beat the virus. If we want to beat the virus, then we have to get people to stay home and follow public health guidance and not feel the pressure of trying to go back to work or restart your business because you're afraid otherwise you won't survive. And so this allows people to get a paycheck, but to stay home. And it actually incentivizes behavior that doesn't push you to go back to work because you're getting your paycheck. And if you feel sick, you can stay home. I have a letter to Amazon that went out last week. And, it's a really intense letter, but I've had a lot of conversations with warehouse workers at Amazon and other workers elsewhere. And they're saying to me, I am having to make this choice about whether I feed my family or whether I go into work sick. That makes no sense at all. Not only for them, it's not the morally right thing to do, but Rashad, it's also stupid if all you care about is your own self-interest and your own health, because this virus does not discriminate. You get it out there and it's going to continue to move into every community.
And we're hearing this, right, as Jeff Bezos is making literally billions of dollars in profit during this crisis, right? The choices that folks are making about how we treat folks who have been targeted, who have been exploited to begin with. And so, once again, to that same point, it's not that the communities are vulnerable, it's that folks have been targeted. It's that folks have been exploited. It's that folks have been treated in really harsh ways. And so they don't have the things. Quickly, as we wrap up, one thing that I also want to raise, because as you talked about essential workers, and you named and raised sort of the fact that many of these folks are undocumented, and but who pay taxes as they work and are being left out of various aspects of the legislation that would ensure that their families have the things that they need. I'm interested if you can just say a little bit about that and some of the efforts to ensure, and at Color of Change, we are a Black civil rights organization. And so we think about immigration a couple of ways. We think about it in terms of allyship. I don't come from immigrants. I come from Black folks who came over here, who were brought over here in a boat and forced into servitude. But our shared struggle and our effort to build for a brighter tomorrow means that we're working together. But we also think about it as an organization that is very clear as a Black civil rights organization that we have a large number of Black immigrants who are being hurt and targeted when being left out of these type of legislation, and uplifting and ensuring that our community as well as our allies are whole in this moment is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a couple of ways that this is happening. So first of all, those stimulus checks of $1,200, which weren't enough, but $1,200 per person, you can't get those stimulus checks if you are an undocumented immigrant, even if you filed with an ITIN number, which is a tax identification number, because a lot of undocumented folks file their taxes. They pay taxes that protect Social Security for you and me when we get old. And so they're excluded. But not only that, it's not just undocumented immigrants, and it's not even just those that are filing with ITIN numbers. We excluded a US citizen who's married to somebody who files with an ITIN number. So both people have paid their taxes. One is a US citizen. They may have US citizen kids. That US citizen is not able to get their stimulus check. Add to that it isn't just undocumented immigrants that can't get the stimulus. We also excluded dreamers. We also excluded legal permanent residents who are here for less than 5 years. And there's Black folks across that spectrum that are not getting stimulus checks. And it is completely outrageous and ridiculous. But on top of that, Betsy DeVos just passed a rule that the money that we had for college students to help college students through universities, that you can't access that money if you're a dreamer. Every single program that we have passed almost every single program has essentially excluded people based on their citizenship status. Not every person that is an immigrant, but many who are on these different kinds of statuses are excluded from any kind of relief. And so this is a real issue. Testing. We excluded folks who are undocumented from free testing.
Which makes no sense.
How crazy is that?
Yeah.
Because, testing and treatment is so important for controlling the spread of the virus. On top of that, the folks who are in incarceration, and this is jails, prisons, and detention centers. Cory Booker and I just introduced a bill called the First Act, which would allow for us to release immediately all the vulnerable folks over 55, under 21, and with chronic health conditions, unless there is a real public safety reason to keep them there. But release all of those and then go through the rest of them case by case and release the ones that can be outside with an alternative to detention. Because most of the 56,000 immigrants who are in immigration jails are, and that's every night, by the way, 56,000 beds every single night in jails. The vast majority have not committed a crime, much less been charged with a crime. If they have been charged with a crime, it's usually a minor offense for something like marijuana possession, which is legal in most states anyway. And many of them are just awaiting a determination of whether or not they can get asylum status or refugee status, or they just don't have money to pay their bond. So they're locked up in a jail that costs you and I a hell of a lot of money. And so, these are all the ways in which immigrants have just been excluded, and it just makes no sense.
And so, all of these issues, right, are part of the work that we have to do to respond now. And they're also part of why elections matter as well, and why we have to continue to build momentum and power. Thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman. Our time has went by so quickly, and I so appreciate all the things you've done to really translate what's happening behind the scenes in Congress right now for our members, and helping folks understand what's at stake as we work to take action to keep our families, ourselves, and our communities safe. You stay safe, my friend. And we are sending you a lot of love and appreciation to you and your team and your family. And we will continue to stay in touch as we collectively work to build the type of response that brings about justice and hopefully a whole lot more equity. So thank you all for joining us for one more episode of the Black Response. We will be coming back with more of these, as well as a digital town hall Monday evening. You can join us at 7 p.m. For a digital town hall right here in this same place and across other platforms. So look out for that, as we will be talking more about the issues that we are facing and ways for everyday people, you, your folks, your friends, your fellow parishioners, your fellow college students, people in your community to take action, because action is the way that we help to translate our awareness into something real. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Congresswoman, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Rashad.
Thanks.